I'm gonna be totally honest with you guys, my expectations for Destiny 2 were pretty low going in. I even wasn't really planning on getting it, but when I found out you can get it with WoW Gold using the Blizzard tokens, I thought, fuck it, may as well. Worst case scenario, I get a basic shoot and loot game for free. Now yes, because of the way I obtained my copy, I had to wait for the PC release, and because of that, most of what I can say about the game has already been touched on plenty by other reviewers. So I'm going to try to speed up this review a bit more than normal to make room for talking about how this game fares as a PC port. A lot of the game at its very core is actually quite good. The combat and gunplay is fun and satisfying, and it's translated really well to the PC's mouse and keyboard controls, with very subtle tweaks to the system like changing how recoil works, so that it still feels amazing when you play on the mouse and keyboard instead of a controller. The mobility is great, with every class having its own unique jumping abilities like a jetpack or a double jump, and the sparrows serving as sort of like your mount to get around the map faster works really well when you unlock it. But unfortunately, this feature is only unlocked when you finish the main campaign, forcing you to run around all these wide open spaces on foot for the duration. It really makes me wish they'd introduced us to sparrows earlier, like as soon as we reached the farm or something. And the game's environments and scenery are really a sight to behold. Each zone is unique and beautifully crafted, and it serves as an excellent setting for the entire game. Add on top of that the equally beautiful soundtrack accompanying it, and you'll find that Destiny 2 is an amazing audiovisual experience. And with all the game's beauty, it still runs fairly well on the PC. Frame rates remain high while the game remains beautiful. Unfortunately though, at the time of this recording there is a bit of a memory leak, so if you leave the game running too long your frame rates might start to go down a bit. But I never really noticed it dropping too far down, and if you don't play for too long at a time you're going to be totally fine. It certainly wasn't nearly as bad as Halo Wars 2 was. And who knows, with the post-launch support they plan on giving the game, this might even be fixed by the time this review comes out. While we're talking about the PC port in particular, it's unfortunately important these days to note that the game has fully fleshed out PC settings. Advanced graphics settings, field of view sliders, specific key bindings, all the settings you'd want to see in a PC port of a console game are here, which is a relief since the rise of the console generation, where PC ports have become more lazy and bare bones. But what many would argue is the real meat of Destiny is its raids. And for what it's worth, the first raid of Destiny 2 is actually pretty fun. You've got not only harsh and unforgiving, but also unique and interesting mechanics for every boss that go beyond just your standard MMO don't stand in the fire style mechanics, and serve to make it immensely satisfying when you and your team conquer these challenges. Going off the raids, using it to segue into the negatives here, I guess I should say using the raid since there's only one and it's actually kinda small, with only 4 bosses as well, and while the mechanics for these fights are interesting, none of the content that comes before the raid prepares you for the level of difficulty and coordination required for it. And the enemies you fight for the bosses are essentially just the same models of enemies you've been fighting the entire game, with the exception of the main boss, which I'll admit is a really cool boss, and unfortunately I don't have any footage of my own for it. And he's really the only unique enemy you fight in the entire game. And this is all a problem the entire game has. There's a massive lack of content, with only 4 rather small areas to explore, 5 strikes which are the game's equivalent to dungeons, a really short campaign that essentially just takes you through these zones as an introduction, and is only very rarely more enjoyable than any of the side quests. And it doesn't help that the story is accompanied by all these bland, emotionless, uninteresting characters, with the exception of Cade 6, voiced by Nathan Fillion, who does a fantastic job. And I find it hilarious that of all the characters, the robot is the only one who's likable and has any kind of personality. It's no wonder he was featured so heavily in the promotional content, or people would have been bored to death. And next, I wish developers would get over this whole automatic flashlight trend. It bothered me in Resident Evil, and it bothers me here, where they try to implement a flashlight that'll turn on automatically when it's dark and turn back off when it's light. But you'll always end up either in a dark place with no flashlight or in a brightly lit area wondering why your flashlight's on. We need to have manual control of our flashlight in a video game. I'm getting real fucking sick of this automatic flashlight thing, and I just wish it would stop. Wait a minute, that's the wrong video. I'm sorry, it's just so hard to tell when it's the exact same fucking problem. It's the fucking worst I've ever seen in this goddamn game. I hate this bullshit and I hate you too, Destiny 2. Oh my god. Yes, automatic flashlights, they're back. And their implementation in Destiny 2 is the absolute worst I have ever seen it. Sending you 4 missions into pitch black areas where the flashlight sometimes won't trigger correctly, or having side content in a cave that just looks like a crack in a rock because you can't tell it's so fucking pitch black, and you can't just manually turn on a flashlight to look at that and see that it's actually a cave, because you don't get to decide when you can see in a dark area. The game decides that for you. Fuck that shit. Okay, rant over. Moving on, we have the way this game handles different weapon types, including power weapons and ammo for these weapons. The way they're organized has changed from Destiny 1, which I don't think they did too bad of a job in. You have basically your kinetic, energy, and power weapons, which for the most part allows you more flexibility in choosing the type of weapon you want to have, so you can have an auto rifle and a scout rifle this time. But strangely, sniper rifles and shotguns are included in the power weapon category. Honestly, these two highly situational weapons have no business being power weapons and would fit much better as kinetic or energy. And plus, with the exclusion of the heavy machine guns weapon category from Destiny 1, it makes it feel like the power weapons category isn't as varied as it could have been. And the way the power weapons ammo works makes it so it isn't restored when you load a checkpoint or re-enter the game, and leads to situations where you'll expend all your power ammo trying to kill a difficult boss but die, and when you reload you won't get that power ammo back, and is especially problematic for the raids where you'll end up pulling a boss encounter just to collect power ammo and wipe, since for a lot of the fights you'll need to start with full power ammo if you're going to succeed. There's also no trading system implemented, which will also put a damper on the raiding scene, as we found out during our own stream of the raid, because if someone goes into the raid without a certain weapon type that helps on certain bosses, you can't just trade them one of your spares if you have one, and they're ultimately shit out of luck. There's several clunky and awkward UI choices, such as the challenges menu being blocked by any loot showing up on your screen, or specifically on the PC, the basic lack of text chat channels, a standard fucking feature of MMOs that Destiny 2 seems to lack. There's no way to communicate with your clan or people nearby unless you're in a fire team. And the game also has its fair share of bugs, ranging from ADS pattern glitches to fucked up physics bugs and more. The character customization's a steaming pile of dog shit, with no way to rotate the camera to look at the back of your character's head to look at tattoos, markings, or hairstyles from behind. A severe lack of variety and some of the ugliest faces you've ever seen in your goddamn life. Perhaps even on par with some of the presets from Mass Effect Andromeda. And we don't even have the option to give our character a beard to hide the ugly ass face underneath, even though we have NPCs in games sporting their own beards. It's apparently too much to allow players to have the option to have their own beards. The emotes, while funny and fun to obtain, are locked to only one slot to equip. And while you can bring yourself to a total of 4 equipped emotes, technically, 3 of those are irreplaceably locked to your default wave, sit, and dance emotes, and only that one remaining slot can be mapped to any unlockable emotes you find. The Crucible PvP mode is this forgettable hybrid between Halo and Call of Duty, with none of the customizable game types of Halo and none of the balance of Call of Duty. The loot is 100% RNG based, with no way to farm specific items except for the highest of the high tier gear. Color shaders, which are your primary method of customizing this gear, are all single use, so you have to go out and farm random shit hoping you get the colors you want, or you can get these colors from loot boxes. And even that still can be considered farming, just with your money instead of with gameplay, due to the heavy RNG nature of all the loot in this game. And while there are a few shaders you can buy if you have any Bright Dust currency, that currency is still only acquired from dismantling Bright Engram loot, and that's not even a guarantee that the shader you want is one of the 3 available on rotation. And you know I'll support microtransactions if it means free DLC, but we know for a fact that this isn't the case. In fact, they've already announced their first paid DLC pack coming this holiday season. Really that soon, like they knew there wasn't enough content to last until then. It unfortunately seems to be following the same pattern as Destiny 1 in that regard. The first thing I definitely want to change is in regards to the game's difficulty curve. As I mentioned before, the difficulty and coordination required for raids is great, but there isn't really any kind of content of moderate difficulty to sort of prepare you for these raids. So I would have added more kind of like difficulty options. Of course, maybe something like an easier version of the raid with a bit simpler mechanics, but you don't get the high-end loot and unique weapons from it. But going beyond that as well, like harder difficulties of the strikes and stuff like that, sort of like prestige mode, but sort of bridging the gap between the two. And I wouldn't stop there either. I'd also add higher difficulty settings for adventure quests and main quests even, as currently the main storyline is far too easy the first time around, with most of the bosses getting absolutely annihilated by a single magazine of power ammo or a single super. Next, I would have liked to see just a tad bit more freedom with weapon mods. Currently you do have the option of swapping out the mods of energy weapons to do different damage types, but I would have liked to see one step beyond that would have made a huge difference. I would have liked to be able to swap out an energy mod for a kinetic mod instead, turning that weapon into a kinetic weapon instead of energy, or vice versa. This would have given players a ton more freedom customizing their loadout, as they wouldn't find a kinetic auto rifle for example, but oh no, they wanted an energy auto rifle and that one's so good, but they can't use it because it's kinetic and they wanted energy. And with the damage types of all the energy weapons being swappable anyways, I feel like the damage type of the weapons isn't too important to their identity, with the exception of exotic weapons which you can't change the mods in the first place. Next, I feel like this game underutilizes its third-person view, especially with how natural the third person feels when it does kick in, when you're using swords or scorch cannons, and also with how bulky and huge the weapons can look in first person. I would have given players the option, either in the menus or as a hotkey like Fallout does it, to just enable third person view whenever you want instead of with just certain weapons. I also would have liked to see more weapons and vehicles added to the in-game sandbox. Things that you could pick up and use in a fight temporarily, as they only have limited ammo that you can't replenish, or a limited health pool for vehicles that depletes as you use it. Things like the Cabal flamethrowers or miniguns that can be dropped by the elite versions of the people wielding them as you kill them, or the Cabal gunships or tanks you see around, having the option to hijack them somehow. It'd even be a reason to get more mileage out of the awesome tank you get to drive for one of the campaign missions. And lastly, I feel like any game where you have a spaceship and you fly between different planets isn't living up to its potential unless you can take direct control of that ship. Having some form of space flight or space travel, missions, and combat would have gone a long way towards making Destiny seem more interesting. Like having the first encounter of the raid being a space battle where you have to fight off Cabal ships in order to land on the Leviathan. Plus, it also would have made it so your choice of ship actually had more significance, as right now it only serves as a glorified loading screen. All that said, it's time to render the final verdict for Destiny 2. Without hesitation, I'm going to give this a 6 out of 10. There's fun to be had, but it's definitely not going to blow your dick off. I even went into it with low expectations and I was still disappointed. You'll probably have fun if you play it with friends, but too many aspects of the game are stupid and frustrating for me to really give it a recommendation. Especially with BioWare's Anthem on the horizon, which looks fucking amazing. If you're looking for a good shoot and loot game, I'd recommend looking back at Borderlands 2 and not Destiny 2. So yeah, that's all for this video. Go down below the video and push some buttons, and if you support me on Patreon, I'll love you unconditionally. And I will see you guys later.
Look upon me, Dominus of the Red Legion, Annihilator of suns, Raiser of 1,000 worlds, Slayer of gods and Conqueror of the light. I am Gary!